Sensory integration disorder, sensory processing disorder, sensory integration dysfunction, all kinds of names. The reason that there's not a specific name for it is because there's not a specific diagnosis for it. It's not technically listed in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual where we get all of these diagnoses from. However, it's agreed upon across the board, pretty much unanimously that sensory integration or dysfunction or disorder is a big challenge for a lot of these guys who have developmental and intellectual disabilities. Noah is one of them. If you've ever seen my pictures, those of you who are friends with me on Facebook or have seen him around, maybe you saw him at the pancake breakfast, he's got earmuffs on. That's that auditory processing. It's a challenge for him. It's a big deal. He can't stand it. He carries 2 pairs of earmuffs everywhere he goes, just in case one breaks. So sensory integration or sensory processing disorder is a big challenge for a lot of these guys. We all remember the 5 basic senses from kindergarten, right? Sight, sound, taste, smell, touch. Any one of these 5 things can be a source of problem for these guys. They can either be overstimulated or understimulated to any one of these things. If they're already building up, they're already getting some discomfort from a few things, a smell or a taste or whatever is just the final straw that pushes them over the edge. We talk about sight. Noah can go outside. I talked to a man this weekend. His kid couldn't be outside without sunglasses. The bright light was just way too much for him. Flashing lights, flickering lights, all that stuff would send him into a meltdown. So they had to be very cautious and very careful where they took him to prevent meltdowns. Sounds, like I said about Noah, that's a huge one. That's a big challenge for us. Taste can be particularly challenging because you have a higher risk of choking for this population. I've seen Noah literally touch food to his tongue and throw up immediately. I don't mean he chewed it up, swallowed it, then threw up. I don't mean he even chewed it up. I mean he literally touched it to his tongue and began to throw up. So, you have aspiration precautions. It also has what's known as pica, if anybody you've ever heard of that, where people eat things that aren't edible, things like rocks, dirt, brush, bushes, whatever, any of that stuff. And again, we've got this risk at higher population, or this population's at higher risk of choking. I actually ran a call myself personally when I was at AIDS to a group home where a young man, we were doing CPR on a probably 45-year-old man. And what we found out was he was, the person running the group home told him he could watch the football game if he finished his food. So he stuffed it all in. We pulled 2 Cornish hens and half a loaf of bread out of his airway. He just stuffed it all in to go watch his food, and then he choked and died. So choking hazards are a big problem for this population because of taste sensing, or that's one of the factors. Smells, think of all the stuff associated with like a car wreck, battery acid, oil, radiator fluid, airbag dust, all that stuff coming in on top of all the noise that just happened. That all can lead to a meltdown. Probably the biggest of all of them for us though is touch. When we think about touch, we think about things that we touch with our hands. But at the same time, everything in this, everything around us is touching us. The integumentary system is the largest organ in the body, right? So the tag on the back of your shirt that's touching the back of your neck, or the hem of your sock running across your toe, making that uncomfortable for you. The hardness of that chair, the temperature in the room, all of that stuff is touching you and can be a source of overstimulation for someone with sensory processing disorder. So keep that in mind. You may not know what is causing it. There could be anything going on that you're not aware of. All right, so we talked about the 5 external stimuli. We also have internal stimuli, right? We have internal senses that we may not even be aware of. You may not still, at this point in time in your life, you may not be aware of them, but they're here. Interoceptive stimuli, the information that we receive from our organs. So when your heart starts racing, you start feeling that fluttering in your chest. That's information that's received through interoceptive stimuli. And some kids may have a problem, may go into meltdown when their heart rate gets above 120 or 130. So when they know they have to do something physically exerting, they may have a meltdown. Or it may keep them from doing anything physically exerting at all. They just stay on the couch all day just to keep them from having a meltdown. Hunger. Hunger is the bane of our existence. Noah is like the Betty White commercial. You're not yourself when you're hungry. That's him. That's Noah. Every time we go to pick Noah up from school, it's like, hey buddy, how was your day? Here's a sandwich. Seriously, every single day. Because when he starts getting hungry, when his attitude starts changing, it's like flipping a switch. And we don't say, All right, calm down. We say, hey buddy, how about a sandwich? Hey buddy, how about a bag of chips? How about a bag of fruit snacks? Because we know that that's why his mood is changing. He's starting to get hungry. Digestion, we all know how uncomfortable digestion can be. That digestion is the, that interoceptive stimuli. State of arousal, think about puberty. Think about puberty for a typical child, what someone has to go through, going through puberty. Now imagine that same person has a developmental or intellectual disability, or God forbid some type of, maybe they're nonverbal. What kind of challenges this would go through that they would have every single day going through this time in their life. It would be a horrible challenge for them, So those are the kinds of things that you have to worry about. And then mood swings. Living with Noah is like living with, a moody little teenager every single day. He can go from the happiest of happies to the lowest of the lowest, and he can be anywhere in between at any given time. Just bounces around all over the place. So that's our interoceptive stimuli. We also have what's known as vestibular stimuli. This is our orientation in the environment. Without this stimuli, we would feel like we were floating, right? This is what places us in this chair, in this room at this particular time. Some things that stimulate our vestibular stimuli is, think about a swimming pool, that floating environment. Then think about all the autistic children that you've ever heard of that ended up in swimming pools. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Another thing, I go back to Disney World with Noah. We go to Disney World a lot because it's very autism friendly. They have a lot of ways to help us. They don't really give you anything, and that's not what we want, but they make it easier for us. So, we do that a lot. My wife took him on the Tower of Terror at 4 years old. I was petrified. I thought she was crazy. I didn't know what in the world she was thinking. For those of you that don't know, the Tower of Terror takes you up and it just drops you like, I don't know, 100 feet, whatever. So it's very scary. It's dark. With some strobe lights and things. I thought she was crazy. He absolutely loved it. That's what we did the rest of the day, over and over and over. And then I got to thinking about it. That's a vestibular response. That gut feeling that you get when the bottom drops out and you get that really excited, nervous, and scared and everything all at once that you crave so much. Well, he craved it even more than we did. So we stimulated that vestibular response, and he wanted to continue doing it over and over. Think about how else can you stimulate that falling feeling? That jolt all of a sudden. You can't. There's nowhere else. Yeah, there's nothing else really, and you're expecting that. This is kind of a drop all of a sudden. So there's really no way to stimulate that, and he does it still to this day. Every time we go down there, we'll ride it 8 or 10 times before we come home. He absolutely loves it. That's a vestibular response. The final response is proprioceptive. And this is the information that our body receives from our joints and muscles, through unconscious thought. And what you'll see with this a lot of time is the rough housing. They're seeking that information, that jolt, that falling, or up against a wall, or tripping, or rough housing, wrestling with other people. You may see this call if you come to somebody like my house, who my 6-year-old is the size of an 8-year-old, and my 18-month-old, I put on 12-month shorts on him this morning when he left at 2.5 years old. So he's a tiny little guy. So he starts seeking proprioceptive stimuli, come off the top bunk, land on top of my little, 2-year-old. We could be calling an ambulance for that. You may see that, So that's the kind of thing that parents have to balance. If you have 2 siblings in the house, you have to take care of both of them, right? So keep in mind that there's more than just the information that you can see. There's stuff going on inside as well. All right, so we talk about the brain. God made our brains very complex, all of this stuff. We couldn't begin to discuss all the stuff in this slide. But the point is that, all of this stuff has to work together, right? We talk about a traffic cop directing traffic outside of a school. He does his job, he's doing a good job, everything flows well, traffic's not backed up, you don't have any problems, nobody mad, yelling, screaming at each other. Things are going the way they should, right? But what happens if at the same time of day he's not there the next time? People are stopping and going and screaming and hollering, people getting upset. This is kind of how we relate the brain, to like the traffic cop. And the person with an intellectual or developmental disability, maybe that traffic cop to them is a medication or a coping strategy or something that they've learned that keeps things flowing for them, that helps them get through their day every single day. That may be just what they need to get through that day. And without that medication or without that coping skill, it turns into a meltdown like you saw in the video of Noah. The process of sensing, the body receives the information from the environment The nervous system scans it, determines the important, prioritizes the response, and then acts on it. All right, so you touch a hot stove. That information processed from the environment, right? It's coming in. The nervous system scans it, determines the important. This is a pretty big deal. Probably need to do something about this, and then acts on it, and you pull your hand away, right? And that happens in a matter of milliseconds. So for somebody that may have trouble filtering and ignoring things, they touch that hot stove with their left hand, and in their right hand they have their Hot Wheels car, and they're rolling that Hot Wheels car in their hand, and they're focused on that Hot Wheels car. They're still going to receive that information from the environment, right? They're still going to know that their hand is being burned. Nervous system is going to scan it, and number 3 is where we hit the train wreck, right? Determine the important, prioritize the response. I'm doing this. This is more important. So you can see where this might be a challenge for these people every day. You know, this type of filtering and ignoring could be a challenge for them. They may not act appropriately, or it takes them longer to act appropriately. They don't perceive the information right away like we do. Particularly those with autism and other sensory disorders, this is a challenge for them, the filtering and ignoring. So keep that in mind. All right, so that was Noah's face a few minutes ago, right, in the video. And Noah is like a thermometer, like you see on the Looney Tunes cartoons. The thermometer gets up, and then it just explodes, right? You can see it on his face just as clearly as you can see that cartoon. You start seeing things like this: emotional outbursts, aggression, flushed face, perspiration, high-pitched, loud voice. He'll go through every one of those. He'll start getting more and more aggressive. His voice will start getting louder. His pitch will start getting higher. Perspiration, flushed face, he'll start getting mad. Every bit of that. When you start seeing this, it's time to start de-escalating. It's time to start looking for the problem, finding out why we're getting here. Why are we getting agitated? What do we need to do to fix it? Increased speed of movement, decreased eye contact. They're looking for a way out. They're trying to figure out, I don't like this. I'm done. I'm over it. Lack of vocalization, even in verbal people who are verbal, and then poor attention. I'm done. I'm done listening to you. I don't care what you have to say anymore. I'm doing what I want to do. All right? They don't like it. They're ready to be over it. Some responses to this, some things that you may see as a result of this: fear and anxiety. This is our wheelhouse. This is what we hope that our dog will help Noah with. This is the reason that we put Noah on medication, his fear and anxiety. The doctor described it to us as every day we wake up fresh and renewed with an empty glass, right? And then as stuff starts happening, we start putting stuff in that glass, and it starts compounding throughout the day. You start having a bad day, right? It starts getting worse. Things start compounding until eventually, that one day out of 100, you blow up. You start, pitching a fit or whatever. Well, Noah wakes up every day with his glass 60% full already. So as that stuff compounds, it doesn't take near as much for him to lose it, for him to go into a full meltdown. And that's why, because of he's scared all the time. He's always a nervous wreck. So hopefully, a combination of the medication and his service dog, he'll be able to get through that. Fight or flight, that goes for everybody, right? Anybody could go through that, but it's going to be exaggerated greatly for these guys. Striking out can be a very challenging aspect for these guys. You want to stay out of arm's reach, if you can. You may see a repetitive stereotypic movement, that stimming that we talked about, the flapping, the rocking, the jumping, any of that can be what they move to. That could be their sensory response. And then throwing up. I've seen Noah get so worked up he just throws up at the drop of a hat. So any of these things can be a response. And this is by no means the end of the list. This is just a few things that you could look for. And again, none of this is all inclusive. Any of this can be all or none or more than. So just keep that all in mind. All right, sensory overload. When they reach their sensory overload, it's going to cause one of three things. All right? The first one, sensory avoidance or sensory defensive. Any of that constant bombardment. I've had too much. I'm done. I'm over it. Forget about it. Right? That's one thing that you may see. They start sensing information. They start seeking that. So now they're understimulated and they want that stimulation. Their body doesn't respond typically to sensory information. It takes more to respond. So that's why you'll see them start flapping or you'll see them start rocking. They're seeking that information. They're trying to get it. The more nervous or the more into it they get, the more fervently they start rocking or flapping their hands or whatever they're doing. It's an insatiable desire. I talk about people who smoke or dip or are addicted to nicotine, and you've gone that couple of hours, you've reached your limit. You know, you start needing that nicotine. I need something. I'm starting to get nervous. And that's kind of how this is. This is an insatiable desire. They're going to get it regardless, whether it's appropriate or not. They're going to get what the information that they're looking for. And then the final thing, you may see motor skill problems. They have trouble processing this information correctly. They start getting clumsy or awkward, accident prone. Or that's what it looks like. You know, it could be intentional that they're doing it, intentionally falling over, intentionally falling into people. I've seen Noah, when we go, you know, out places and we've been out for a long time, he starts getting tired. He starts seeking this proprioceptive. It gets ridiculous. You know, he's tripping and falling every 5 seconds. And every time he hits the ground, he's getting that proprioceptive stimuli from the ground. And he's basically understimulated to it, and he needs more of it, you know. So that's the kind of things that you look for. That rough housing goes along with this. All right, another thing that's important to remember, especially in our field, is the pain and processing. Remember, I talked about the brain may work and the feet may work okay, and it's just the disconnect in between that makes things flow smoothly for some of these guys. Pain processing can be the exact same thing. You know, there's that disconnect between the actual what's causing the pain and the brain. So for Emily, I told you that she was born with hydrocephalus. So she had a shunt installed. She went through, they go through and they check them, you know, every so often or whatever. And one day she goes into the hospital with some unspecific problems. They start trying to figure out what's wrong with her, They can't figure it out. 2 or 3 days later, you know, they're going through it. Somebody says, well, what about her shunt? Is her shunt clogged? Could her shunt be clogged? And they're like, no, there's no way. There's no way her shunt could be clogged. If her shunt was clogged, she'd have a terrible headache. And she hasn't complained about a headache once. But she doesn't process pain the same way we do. It ended up being a clogged shunt, and they went in and got the shunt cleaned out, and everything was fine. So if you walk up to someone that's been in a car accident and their legs are folded up behind their head and you say, you know, where do you hurt? And they say, I don't hurt anywhere. There could be, you know, it could be very important. This is where patient assessment is crucial for these guys. You need to look, you need to touch, you know, do everything that you can to ensure that you've done a thorough patient assessment and you know everything that there is to know as best you can about that patient. Noah is the exact opposite. I brushed up against Noah yesterday. He fell on the floor and started crying, kicking and screaming. You know, he looks like LeBron trying to catch a foul. You just barely touch him, he falls over screaming. It's horrible. Yeah, so, you know, and it's not that he's faking it. I mean, he's crying real tears over this, you know, and I've just barely touched him. So he's the exact opposite. Pain to him is overboard. It's too much. So that could be either end of the spectrum. There's no one answer.